Coming up on Arirang News, South Korea reports 266 new cases of the coronavirus, a sharp decline from the day before. But the government says if the virus isn't brought back under control, then social distancing will have to be strengthened further. The governor of the Bank of Korea says the resurgence of the virus means the BOK will have to sharply lower its forecast for economic growth this year. The current forecast is minus 0.2%. And it's now mandatory in the city of Seoul to wear a mask at all times when in public places. There'll be fines for those caught not wearing one from mid-October. It's 5 p.m. here in Seoul. Thank you for tuning in to Arirang News. I'm Devin Whiting. South Korea reported 266 new cases of COVID-19 today, almost all of them transmitted locally. The number of cases has been in the triple digits for well over a week, but it's a decline from yesterday's number. Oh Jung-hee has the latest.
South Korea reported 266 new cases of COVID-19 on Monday, 258 of which were local transmissions. 97 of them were found in the capital Seoul, 84 in the surrounding Gyeonggi-do province, and 20 in the city of Incheon, just west of Seoul. South Korea has seen a daily tally of more than 200 new cases for 7 straight days. The figure was above 300 for 3 days in a row from Friday to Sunday. At the government meeting held Monday to discuss the outbreak, South Korea's health minister said that the current situation is very grave as it may develop into a nationwide pandemic.
Over the past 3 days, we have seen a total of almost 1,000 new patients across the country. If we don't curb the current outbreak, then the pain the public will have to go through and the social costs will snowball. I ask everyone to abide by strict social distancing.
He called on people to refrain from having unnecessary gatherings or visits and asked firms to cancel get-togethers. The health minister also urged people to cancel their travel plans, saying the virus could spread to more communities from vacation spots. South Korea raised the social distancing measures to level 2 for the whole country on Sunday. Beforehand, only the greater Seoul area was subject to level 2 measures. The government is considering whether to further raise that level to the highest level of 3, but is cautious because level 3 is close to a full lockdown and could deal another significant blow to the economy. The authorities say they'll first see how things pan out this week, as the effect of the current stricter social distancing measures could be seen starting this week. Oh Jung-hee, Arirang News.
President Moon Jae-in says South Korea is now facing the biggest crisis since the pandemic began, calling on people to abide by strengthened social distancing rules. In a meeting with his top aides on Monday, Moon said that if the number of new cases doesn't come down, then the government will have no choice but to raise the social distancing to the highest level, level 3.
3단계 격상은 결코 쉽게 말할 수 있는 선택이 아닙니다. 일상이 정지되고 일자리가 무너지며 실로 막대한 경제 타격을 감내해야 합니다. 의료 체계까지 무너질 수 있습니다. 최악의 상황까지 가지 않도록 모두가 힘을 모아 주시길 바랍니다.
President Moon also called on doctors not to go on strike against the government's reform drive, saying that it's time the nation works together to get through the pandemic. The government, he said, has no choice but to respond sternly to any move that puts people's lives at risk. The president also said the government will not tolerate any move to hamper quarantine efforts or spread fake news, which he called an antisocial crime that threatens the community. The Blue House has also been stepping up its own quarantine efforts, holding Monday's meeting with participants spaced out and having plexiglass shields between them. It's now mandatory in Seoul starting Monday to wear a mask when in public, and there will be fines for those who don't wear one with a grace period until October. The fine will be 100,000 won, or about $85. The rule applies to public facilities, including restaurants of over 150 square meters and venues like movie theaters and concert halls. The city has adopted what it calls a one-strike policy, which means those facilities will be forced to close for 2 weeks if they violate the current guidelines even a single time. They can also be fined up to about $2,500. Today is the deadline for South Korea and Japan to notify each other if either side wants to end their military intel sharing agreement. Japan's Chief Cabinet Secretary Yoshihide Suga said today that the deal should stay in place to facilitate regional peace and stability. That was his response to South Korea's statement that, in fact, Seoul can terminate the pact at any time because that was the basis on which it decided to suspend the pact's planned termination last November. Seoul had said last August that it would withdraw from the pact after Japan imposed new export controls on South Korea. Seoul sees that move by Tokyo as a retaliation for a court order in South Korea ordering Japanese companies to compensate the Koreans they subjected to forced labor in wartime. The governor of the Bank of Korea, Lee Ju-yeol, says the BOK is going to have to sharply lower its forecast for the Korean economy this year because of the recent surge in virus cases. He was responding to questions from lawmakers in Parliament on Monday. Asked whether the BOK is going to lower its forecast, he said the economic recovery is expected to remain weak and that downside risks have increased with the strengthening of social distancing. A revised outlook from the Bank of Korea is due out this Thursday. The current forecast is for a contraction this year of 0.2%. The Korean wave is going beyond K-pop and the movies. Snacks from South Korea, like ice cream and instant noodles, are making major inroads overseas as well, as our Min Seok-hyun reports.
Korean ice cream is getting attention from young consumers abroad. Some have even shared personal reviews on ice cream brands such as Merona and Summer Crush Coffee. According to data provided by the Korea Customs Service, outbound shipments of ice cream have also been on the rise, and last year, exports hit an all-time high of $54.2 million. This year, a new record high is expected as exports in the first 6 months of 2020 are already up by 7.4% from the corresponding period of 2019. Pingure, one of the country's major confectionery firms, is seeing its best overseas sales figures since first entering the U.S. market through Costco in 2016.
South Korean ice creams were imported the most last year, and about 90% were from Pingure, a sign that we're gaining ground in the American ice cream market.
South Korean instant noodles are meeting similar success. According to South Korean food maker Dongsim, overseas sales accounted for 32% of its total sales in the first half of this year. A New York Times product review in June this year picked Shinramen Black as the world's tastiest instant noodles, and U.S. sales in the first half of 2020 rose by 35% from a year earlier to reach their highest amount ever.
In the second half of this year, we plan to increase exports and expand overseas businesses.
Industry watchers expect Korean snacks to remain popular overseas to the second half of the year. Min Seok-hyun, Arirang News.
More of South Korea's top companies say that in the latter half of this year, they'll be hiring people as needed rather than through open recruitment seasons. It's the first time more of them have opted for the former and not the latter. The job portal site Incruit surveyed 530 publicly traded companies and found that over 41% said they'll be hiring as needed, an increase of more than 10% on year. Only 39.6% said they'll be doing open recruitment, a decrease of 10%. Companies said the pandemic has made open recruitment more difficult. Normally, companies also hire from among new college graduates, but 57% said they won't be doing that either, an increase of 10% from last year. Time now for an in-depth look at the market news this afternoon, and for that I'm joined on the line by Dr. Yang Jun-seok, Professor of Economics at the Catholic University of Korea. Professor Yang, thank you for making time on this Monday.
Happy to be here.
Well, stocks on Wall Street closed strongly higher last Friday, led once again by tech shares, the Nasdaq notching another all-time high. Korean shares up today too. What's the story in the global markets and here in Korea?
Okay, well, as you just mentioned, on Friday, Dow rose by 190 points, S&P hit another peak high, and NASDAQ rose quite a bit as well. What are the reasons? Well, the Guardian newspaper from the United Kingdom had a very nice summary. We've talked about some of these factors before, but the first factor is that Federal Reserve and the U.S. government is taking a very active policy view to try to keep the economy going. So it's maintaining low interest, and it's continuing to buy public and private bonds, and it has strong commitment to support the market. And there's rumors that Fed may even buy stocks. Then the second factor is that tech giants are doing genuinely very well. They've actually gained from the lockdown and shutdown that we had in the United States. So companies like Apple, Microsoft, Facebook, and Google and Netflix are really leading, especially the S&P stock increase. And then because of the various policies, the normal life seems to be returning in the United States, so there's perhaps irrational bit of optimism there. And then fourth factor is hopes for a vaccine is increasing. And then the last factor, which is also, I think, very interesting, is that because of the corona-induced recession and because of the low interest rate, there really isn't a lot of places that money can go to earn high interest. So that is the reason that why the U.S. stock market keeps increasing. And paradoxically, because the Fed is committed to maintaining low interest rate, buying all these bonds and perhaps even stocks, when there's bad news in the economy, as long as the news is not too bad, it actually makes the stock investors more optimistic, because that means that the Fed will continue these unusually active policies even longer. So in some sense, for the stock market currently, bad news is actually good news, as long as it's not too bad. And that seems to be applicable not only to the United States, but most of the major global stock markets as well. The EU stocks, FTSE and the EU 50 were mostly down last week. That's probably because of the coronavirus rising, as well as the post-Brexit trade deal negotiation between UK and EU, which is not going well. They only have up to December 31st to come up with a deal, but they seem to be missing. Then the Shanghai and Hang Seng, it was bad last week, but there was a big recovery in Hong Kong today. Shanghai is only slightly up. Nikkei, again, bad last week. It's only slightly up today, but all the markets seem to be doing well following the United States, because they just had a very good Friday at the end of last week. And now for Korea, Kospi, after a bad week last week, it's up 1.1% today. Kosdaq, again, bad last week, but it was up 2.48% today. The reason that it was so bad last week was because the coronavirus in Korea seems to be rising. But it seems to be recovering today, partially because, well, perhaps we can get beyond this. There's, I think, some more hope for the domestic economy. And also the individual investors, even though they sold today, they seem to be keeping the face of the market. Various reports says that they have a lot of ready cash that they are willing to put into the Korean stock market. So the fall last week just may have been individual stock investors taking their profit.
Right. Well, looking at the economy, the Korean economy more broadly, we heard today the Bank of Korea is probably going to lower its growth forecast, but the Hyundai Research Institute has already lowered its forecast for GDP growth this year from 0.3% to minus 0.5%. The previous forecast was 4 months ago. What do you make of this new estimate?
Okay, well, because we're nearing the end of the year, we see the growth forecast sort of converging. So in the OECD, they said that Korean economy may fall by minus 1.8%, but they have revised it to minus 0.8%. Korean estimates, which centered around 0% range, is now heading toward perhaps around the level of minus 1%. So all these international and domestic forecasters seem to be converging here. The Hyundai estimate is getting a lot of attention because it's the first report since the coronavirus has started getting worse again in the Seoul area, and it does acknowledged that there will be a double hit on the Korean economy, domestic consumption and exports. Consumption will not fully recover. It'll be minus 3.0% for the year. Exports will also take a hit this year. Seems about minus 9.2% overall, but that 9.2% negative growth sort of underestimates the impact of exports on Korean economy because we also had a very bad year in terms of exports last year. Last year, the exports fell by minus 10.4%, so we're starting from a lower base and it's getting lower. But that cannot be avoided because of the coronavirus. But if we end up with only about a negative 1% growth rate this year, I would say we're getting off very lucky.
All right, Professor, we're out of time now. We're going to have to leave it there for today. Thanks so much for making time today. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
That brings us to the end of this newscast. Thank you for watching. More live news coming your way at 7 p.m. Korea time.